This is a much more direct video. It's going to be free of a lot of production value and gimmicks, and I'm just going to talk about the title of the video called Vehicles I'm going to Take to the Grave with Me. And I've had this conversation with so many people now because we're in an era of the automotive world and tech world where things are changing right in front of our eyes. There's not this huge 20-year stretch where you're like, oh, things are happening slowly. They're happening seemingly overnight. And it's causing some problems in terms of affordability, accessibility, and longevity. So I'm going to break this down into segments. And the first one being the cost. It's been a long time since I felt this way. I was about 21 or 22, and I was working a shit job, and I was in a place where I never could even conceive of myself owning a car over $25,000. And the more I worked in my 20s and was getting educated, it was the first time I ever put a car in my wall. And I thought $30,000 is like maybe one day. And now I'm in a place where I've owned a whole bunch of cars, and I have had the opportunity to drive all these different expensive cars, cheaper cars, and it hit me. It hit me when I had a conversation with somebody overseas, not in North America, when they're like, you guys are lucky. We can't even afford anything. A $50,000 car here is like $100,000 there. So I understand that part of it. But when you factor in all the things, the cost of education, the cost of housing, the taxes, and the cost of insurance, and all the real world things, and then you put an average transaction price on a new car of around $40,000, which is like, $8,000 more than it was 2 years ago. And then you have a decimation of the used car market because of COVID and all that. And you look at how inflated the costs of all these vehicles are. If I was 21 again, and I looked at the fact that to buy a Civic Type R was going to cost me almost $45,000 for a Honda Civic, I would have just been done. I would have found a new hobby, a new passion, something else I can devote my time to. And I think these car companies, the dealerships, the market, like Bring a Trailer, which I'll get into in a minute, has inflated, and you can blame lending too for this, for just giving loans to everybody. It's made this whole car world this entire huge bubble. And it's not just the everyday driving cars, it's the cars that get people excited about that hobby, about that community. And when I talked to Scott from King Motorsports, we had this discussion about Bring a Trailer. And he's like, 15 years ago, we could talk about some Honda products or some of the enthusiast cars that you could look forward to buying used. Well, now those cars have been blown up in price to the point of like, who's going to spend $25,000, $30,000 for an old S2000 that's in decent shape? Or I even asked him about a CRX. I'm like, they're building CRXs, putting B18s in, and I'm like, how much is it? He's like, well, it's not so much that you can't get them, it's just you can no longer get parts for them. So while you might have an affordable car, then you're going to dick around with trying to rebuild a car that there's no parts for. And it's just, we're getting into that phase. The older cars are too old now. And I even think about that with my own S2000. I just got a clutch done because I was out on track, and after like 25 minutes, it started to slip. And I'm like, yeah, the clutch is like 16 years old. I'm like, okay, do I really want to go out and destroy this car now because it's actually worth something? And to go find another one that would be affordable is going to be a pain in the ass. And, this whole cost discussion has become way bigger than it ever has before because it's affecting real cars, it's affecting enthusiast cars, and even like I helped Randy Rorman, who owned that yellow LFA in our video, and he wanted to dump it because he knew he was going to make a lot of money on it, and he wanted to put it on BAT. And I'm like, I'll do it as a favor. I'll put it on there for you. We had the car in the video, and he wanted a lot of money for it, and rightfully so. It's a special car. But then you look at how inflated the prices are. I said in the video that car would probably be $1 million in like 10 years, and it's sold for $810,000 already within like 6 months of making this video. And it's difficult from somebody that is struggling, difficult to somebody that is just a moderate enthusiast. And then, you get into some of these newer cars and you look, they're really They're cool, they're fast, but they're not all that special. Which brings me to the second part of this. What's happening to newer cars? Well, I think it's pretty obvious if you watch some of these videos exactly where the direction is going. All the fun, high-performance cars are insanely fast. The cars are faster than they've ever been in history. You could go 0 to 100 miles an hour, in some cases faster than cars used to go 0 to 60. And, there is something to be said about how they're doing that and how amazing it is if you like fun cars or fast cars. And the way they've done it is taking over every single mechanical system, turning into an electromechanical system with, in many cases, over 50 ECUs on a car now. So it's a ton of electronics. But they also have centralized control over every single system on the car from every corner, from braking to steering systems to throttle to engine mapping to differentials, all-wheel drive control. So much of these things would not be possible without that new generation of microprocessor that's in all these cars. So if that's what you like and you want to just go 0 to 60, 0 to 100 fast, these cars are incredible for that. They're also giving people the ability to do things that their driving capability never allowed them to do before and feel a lot safer doing it. And I got out of the 911 Turbo S and I'm sitting here, when I got the car, I'm like, this car, there's a level of fear that I had driving because I always heard about how fast it was. This is like the pinnacle of like the Porsche lineup. And then I got it out on track and I'm sitting and I'm driving like it's just like every other car, if not feeling even more safe. And, we broke down how and why it's so capable, but I never got a solid feeling. And on most of these cars, not just that one, the more I drive these cars, the less I feel like I'm actually driving them. And we just did the new M3 and M4 on track, a manual and an automatic. And the manual was more engaging, of course, because you had to, obviously you're shifting the gears yourself. But after about 30 minutes, I just felt like it didn't matter what I did behind the wheel. I could do it apex early, later, brake too late, brake too early. There's this lack of connectedness that I'm getting with all of the new cars that I'm driving. I no longer feel like it's a challenge. I'm actually doing something. There always seems to be the car is doing more than I am. And it's like, I guess the only equivalent I could say is it's like playing a video game by yourself. Like eventually, if it's just you sitting there by yourself and you have no community, no connection to something, and you can just turn on easy mode, hard mode, and just sit there, eventually you're going to get bored. And that's what it's like driving a lot of these new cars. So you add all of that complication up, and this is something that we're seeing more and more of. And you're starting to see more videos as the mainstream cars are pushing over to EV, things like Mach-E's, Teslas, Acura. I mean, basically, you can name any car product that has over-the-air updates, that most of the subsystems of the car now are reflashable. And you have a problem with software on these cars, something that's weird that's happening, that's no longer really a mechanical failure, it's a software failure. And there is no fix for that. That means when you take it to the dealership, it's like, oh, we're going to put it in the bug list, send it up the chain, and we'll fix it whenever they come out with a bug fix for it. And it's going to, the whole driving experience, that whole car experience is now becoming like a Windows update or a Mac update or a phone update. Security patches, you're going to have to wait until they patch out bugs if the telematics gets hacked. I mean, there's all these different things about modern cars now that they still don't drive themselves, really drive themselves, yet they're being treated like a complete, like something that you would plug into a computer monitor at home, like something that is entirely software driven, yet you're still having to drive it. And we're in this very difficult in-between phase of manufacturers understanding that this is the only viable way to keep cars relevant. They can't keep up with the constant mechanical changes, so now they're in the huge wave of what can we do on the software side? How can we create character in our cars and be able to instantly change them by flipping some code versus having to completely redo a front suspension or changing out a steering rack or changing out an all-wheel drive system or putting 3 or 4 different motors or engines in and in 3 different models. It's all become consolidated. So you could have essentially one architecture where you can plug, copy, and paste in similar components, and you're just putting on another flash or reflashing program or changing tuning slightly, and then you can differentiate your price point based on that change versus all the expensive stuff in terms of manufacturing. And again, what it's doing is it's making it easier for the manufacturers to keep up, but it's also going to make it harder for them as they have to become software companies. And then the owners of these cars are going to have to change their mentality of things are not going to get fixed right away. They may not even be able to fix certain things because everything is now software driven. I want to use my phone as a key. Well, oh, my phone's not compatible, and now I have to hold a key. And the expectation levels are going to get so out of control as people expect their cars to be essentially a giant smartphone or computer. And the manufacturers aren't to that point where they can support that level of expectation. So this is what I'm talking about generationally. This is the future. That's the future car. It's already here. It's already happening. We're talking about it with more companies with infotainment, telematics, and software. We know what's happening, and I think that's why I'm starting to really think to myself, what are the cars that I want to own now that in the next like 4 or 5 years that I have to buy now before they're ridiculously expensive or who knows, even outlawed at some point of buying and stuffing away because I know they will be gone. So here's the list of the cars that I'm thinking about and why. So the first 2 that I own already is an LC500, and I know it's a strange car because in a lot of ways there's deficiencies with it. Really what it is it's a celebration of an engine, a reliable V8. And it's a car that I've driven more, and I realize it's a car that I want to keep because it is 100% unique of this era. It is an end of the era car. The other one is the S2000, which is previous generation. Now I appreciate that car more for what it is. And that's another one that I want to keep long term. The next one is a Porsche GT3 and probably a 992 because of the front suspension. It just transforms that car. But I would say any 991.1, 999.2, if you don't know what that is, just basically the last 3 generations of GT3, and you could probably even go back farther if you wanted to, but those cars are going to be cemented in history. And again, if you start to look at prices of these things, and you're going to start to see that shift. A year ago, they were 150 grand to find a new one or a used one that was like pretty much new. Now it's 200,000, and again, it's getting on certain cars before people pick up on it, or they're just out of the realm of affordability, or they're all gone. The next one I thought about was like a Ford GT500. You know where this is going with the American car brands. They're all heavily going to invest in EV. They already have been. Things like the Mach-E. You see Stellantis now with the Hellcats. That would be another one, a Hellcat Red-Eye, a Charger Red-Eye. We had a Red-Eye wide body scheduled that got canceled pretty much the same day they announced their EV cars. So certain engines are no longer going to pass the global emissions, the fuel economy regulations, unless something changes there with governments where they're just like, okay, we're going to let certain cars or certain types of cars through the cracks like they were doing with trucks. Those types of engines, these crazy high performance gasoline powered engines are going to be gone. So that's why, GT500s, the Hellcats, certain Corvettes, the Camaros with high horsepower supercharged engines, Nissan GTR is another good example. Those are all cars that are very soon to be axed. Now we know there's certain cars coming out that are they call them new old cars, and I've heard this more often than not now for new sports cars that are coming out that have a manual transmission, naturally aspirated engines. You get into the affordable ones like the new, whatever it is, the 400Z, manual trans, twin turbo V6, or even just staying with the 370, which was a naturally aspirated V6, super reliable manual trans. ND2 Miata. Those Miatas are going to be, the last of their kind, much like the Lotus Exige, Evora, the new Amira that's coming out. These are cars that we know are the last of their kind by far. And these are the types of vehicles that I'm looking at trying to just get at some point, even if they're used in really good shape, to try to stuff them away as a car person that really loves the driving experience. I'm going to close in just saying this. Every single month that goes by that I drive these cars, part of my passion for it gets sucked out. Just seeing the business side of where the car market is going, the people involved in it that, that love it, but know that, to stay alive in the business world, we have to transition out of what we've been doing, and just seeing the life and the soul get sucked out of so many of these products that I love so much in the past 20 years, because it's the end of an era. It's difficult for me. It's difficult for me to stay passionate and excited, so I'm having to change my mindset of what's the future? How do I change my scope of what cars are and help people learn about them? How do I learn about them and still stay excited? Or is it something that we have to move on from into different hobbies? So it's a very weird place to be. It's very exciting in some ways, but it's also a time, like the point of this video is, start really thinking about the cars that you want to own now before they really are eviscerated and gone and manufacturers kill them off because they can no longer make them. So be curious to see what those cars are that you're interested in. We'll get back to our normal videos coming soon. Thanks.